So at its 50th anniversary, the Economic Community of West African States is 3 member states less. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger left the bloc to form their own alliance of Sahel states. Regardless, the organization's leaders say Ecowas remains strong. But what about its unity? On this episode of the Africanews Debate, we ask, is West Africa more divided or united? Thank you for joining us. My name is Ronald Kato. So, rocked by military takeovers, economic and social upheavals, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, is going through tough times. And that is the subject of our debate this afternoon. Before we get underway, here is a story we did at Africanews marking ECOWAS at 50.
Exactly 50 years ago, on May 28, 1975, 15 West African countries agreed to establish the Economic Community of West African States, also known as ECOWAS. The first leadership was handed to the former Liberian President William Tubman. Thanks to the profound work and call for unity by both the Togolese President Gnassingbé Eyadema and Nigerian former leader Yakubu Gowon, the union came into effect in West Africa. Both traversed the region, leading to the signing of the ECOWAS Treaty in 1975 in Lagos by 50 nations. The Lagos Treaty was meant to enable the free movement of goods and people within the region. It was in 1990 that they abolished the use of personal identification cards while moving across the borders. Despite all its achievement, the journey has never been smooth. The three-nation bloc of Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger announced last year that they were leaving the regional bloc. They then created their own security partnership known as the Alliance of Sahel States, severed military ties with the long-standing Western partners such as US and France, and turned to Russia for military support.
Time to introduce my panel now. I have from Accra, Emmanuel Cotin, Executive Director at the Africa Center for Security and Intelligence Studies. Good afternoon, Emmanuel.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for making time. And from the USA is Dr. Amaka Anku, Africa Director at Eurasia Group. She specializes in political economy and Africa-focused risk analysis. Is it a good morning to you, Amaka? Amaka, are you there?
Yes. Good morning to you, and thanks for having me. I was on mute.
Perfect. Thank you for joining the show. I have also Afolabi Adekayoja, is a political research analyst, joining us from Freetown, Sierra Leone. Good afternoon, Afolabi.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us. And Marie Josiane Nga is the project coordinator at the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, joining us from Akosombo, Ghana. Good afternoon, Marie.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for making time. Can I start with you, Emmanuel? What do you think is the single most important challenge facing ECOWAS as a bloc today? And is it really unique? Or are these unique challenges, or they are the same challenges facing all the other regional blocs in Africa? There's the East African Community, there's SADC. What do you think is the most important challenge facing ECOWAS?
Well, thank you for having me once again. And my greetings to my co-panelists and the global audience wherever they may be. In fact, I want to put it on record that ECOWAS stands as one of Africa's most integrated regional community and a pioneering model for regional cooperation and integration. And amidst the challenges we are facing, any other thing is affected by leadership. The problem with ECOWAS is leadership. and is quite unique across the other blocs within Africa. I think Africa has struggled over the period, if you want me to put it mildly, in the last 30 years to have the generational leaders we have had in the form of the Kwame Nkrumahs, the Jomo Kenyattas, the Julius Nyereres, and of recent times, Nelson Mandela. So if you look at what is happening in Africa, in Ecowas today, it's not only an Ecowas problem. I see it as an African problem, as it permeates across the other blocs. And let me put it kindly here. You see, Africa, if we can put ourselves together by way of leadership, I don't think any African will want to leave the shores of Africa to Europe for greener pastures. And I dare say that the Francophone countries within the ECOWAS bloc, you realize that there are a lot of upheavals within that bloc because of the colonial pacts that existed within the France and these countries. So one may ask, we say democracy. What are the examples of democracy? How can a sovereign country have control over other sovereign countries in modern day world with the kind of globalization tendencies where no country can do it by itself and the world is watching over? Look at what is happening in the United States of America. Is it not leadership issues? So it boils down to we as Africans, especially ECOWAS, to kind of wake up and look at things in a different perspective. Our interdependence on free beats, depending on the Western countries for everything, is a shame. And I think it's about time we move away from that kind of tendencies. We have everything here. And ECOWAS per se, if we do our things right, we trade among ourselves and want to really invest in agriculture, we can feed the world. But the challenge is leadership. And let me backtrack a little bit. What is happening within the Sahel? It's not the first time ECOWAS have been able to overcome some of these challenges. You remember the 1990s and the conflicts that happened, and ECOWAS was able to weather the storm. To me, what is happening currently, I see that as an opportunity for ECOWAS to be able to reform and bring democratic governance to the doorsteps of the people. I think the current crop of
Emmanuel,
leadership
we'll get to the
have,
Sahel. Emmanuel, we'll get to the Sahel in a bit. But the point you make about the current crop of leaders in West Africa, I want to put it to Amaka. To what extent do you agree with Emmanuel's assertion that the challenges that ECOWAS faces today are the result of the leadership it has, the current crop of leaders in the region?
Yeah. So look, this is how I would characterize the problems that ECOWAS face. Broadly, it's one of economic development. It's one of finding ways to drive, this is a problem that's faced by countries across the region, but since we're talking about ECOWAS, finding ways to drive economic transformation such that these countries transition from just selling commodities to actually exporting, value-added products, which will create jobs and boost manufacturing. So I say that to say that's the core of the problem. The symptoms that we see, which we can characterize as challenges: insecurity, the lack of provision of public goods, right? All of those things flow from the fact that we haven't yet figured out how to drive economic transformation and create jobs and boost non-commodity growth. So for me, fundamentally, the challenge is about attracting capital and driving economic transformation. And when you do that, you will solve the other symptoms of the problem we see, which is insecurity and the rest.
Afolabi, how do you attract the capital that Amaka talks about when your region is rocked by insecurity, military takeovers, and all manner of political problems?
Well, one of the first solutions really is about a much more forward-thinking and long-term approach to many of these problems that we are facing. One of the biggest issues within the region right now is the fact that many of the leaders, I know going back to Emmanuel's point about them being fairly gerontocratic, is the fact that many are looking at a more short-term approach, really trying to find a way to get the dividends quickly, something that helps them with any re-election prospects, and something that helps them in trying to really cater to their different constituencies. But the problem is that this is a very young continent. It's a very young area. It's very heterogeneous as well, and many of the citizens don't feel the level of trust in the leaders who are in place right now. Is the reason why many targeted disinformation campaigns can succeed, because people don't feel that there's that level of trust with the people who are in place right now. The challenge that many African governments are going to deal with, especially in trying to attract capital, is in being able to get the confidence of investors externally, but also showcase the fact that they can actually lead and guide a population that is still really at odds and really feeling that level of distrust with the leadership and with the elite, in making sure that they can take the necessary steps forward. If I give an example of Nigeria's Tinubu, who has been quite lauded externally and and foreign, especially in terms of the reforms around the subsidy and the foreign exchange window, but continues to be quite unpopular within the country because of the sense that these methods, these reforms are quite difficult for the average Nigerian, and the level of communication and the level of trust that will make people feel that whatever is being done is for their benefits in the future, that connection has not yet been made. And that is really one of the biggest problems with many West African leaders trying to attract that level of capital and the confidence going forward.
Marie, Afolabi makes the point that West Africans do not have trust in their leaders, and this is interesting because the region at one point was really making big strides in the direction of democracy and democratic elections, but over the last 5 or so years, democratically elected leaders have been overthrown in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and in Guinea. What's going on? Are West Africans, losing their trust in democracy so much that they want military juntas, unelected leaders to take over? Is the problem this serious?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I think, yes, it is true that over years, citizens' trust is declining. From the early days of its creation, ECOWAS was envisioned as a community of people, not just a community of government. So that's how come it came up with some protocols on free movement, peacekeeping, and good governance, where those frameworks were largely welcomed by West African citizens who hoped that the bloc would act as, a shield against authoritarianism, war. So for years, there has been public support. There has been also moments of high trust. We remember between 1990s and 2000, ECOWAS gained a lot of credibility through the ECOMOG peacekeeping operation in Liberia and Sierra Leone. We remember also in 2017, the peaceful removal of Yaya Jammeh in the Gambia, and also that regional mobility that we are talking about, related to cross-border trade and free movement. So during those years, ECOWAS was seen not only as a security anchor, but as a vehicle for regional solidarity and Pan-African identity. But as you said, since 2020, we are seeing a steady decline in trust. There has been dramatic erosion in trust, especially among youth and civic actors. Why? Because of perceived elitism. ECOWAS is increasingly viewed as dominated by heads of states with little accountability to citizens or parliament. There is also that inconsistent enforcement, explained by harsh sanctions on some countries, contrasted with silence on terrorism and electoral manipulation. And then also lack of civic engagement, sanction fatigue, in the AES countries, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, sanctions are seen as punishing civilians more than the junta leaders. So that's undermined ECOWAS moral standing. So as a result of all this, many citizens no longer see ECOWAS as a guarantor of their rights or future, but rather as an elite kind of diplomatic club disconnected from, lived reality. And it means so much. It means so much for the future. It means that there is that high or huge task for ECOWAS to rebuild that trust. That would be essential for, any regional integration efforts.
And that's the feeling many citizens in Africa have about regional blocs, Emmanuel. Many East Africans think the East African community is a talking shop, a club of elites who meet in Arusha, Tanzania every now and then, say things and fly back to their countries. It's the same feeling about SADC, the regional bloc for Southern African countries. African regional blocs, not just ECOWAS, failing to integrate properly, to integrate their populations, to integrate their publics?
Well, if you look at our tradition as Africans, we are more even democratic than the institution itself. You see the Ubuntu principle, I am because you are. It is so embedded with us as Africans. Like I said, and I'm so happy about the comments my other colleagues made, especially Dr. Ameka, when she talked about attracting investment, and she also spoke about security and peace within the sub-region. And my other colleagues from Sierra Leone talking about the trust level in our leadership. And the last speaker before I came who spoke about the work ECOWAS have done and how citizens are losing trust as the guardian of the people within the sub-region. So you see that all of this boils down to one thing, leadership. If we run away from leadership, how do we bring all of this together? And as Africans, I think we have a great opportunity now. It's just like what happened when the Asian tigers had their opportunity. We have a very useful population. We have the natural resources. All we just need to do is how we can integrate and benefit from the after. Because if you look at Africa, per our colonial legacies, the way Africa was partitioned between the French, the Portuguese, the English, and the other grouping, it becomes difficult for us as Africans to get to come together and chart a common cause. And that is why the other speakers spoke about the elite club. Democracy has become a mirage within Africa. Democracy in Africa is to the highest bidder. So if you have money, you have a greater opportunity of even leading. And that is the reason why we have this kind of leaders we have, where I would term them as square pegs in round holes. So if we really want to get the dividends of democracy across all the African regional blocs, it begins from we, the youth. We have to take our destiny into our own hands and put our leaders, in particular, under the spotlight. You realize that they've created a culture where we are kind of dependent on them. They create a culture, they don't give opportunity to we, the youth. Unless you are dependent on them, you can get an opportunity to go. Look at what has happened in Senegal. Look at the useful young man who came there and the good thing he's doing there. I think that is the focus we, the youth, will have to, and forget about the freebies these leaders throw at us, and make sure that we elect credible leaders who have the wherewithal, who have the technical know-how, and have the hearts of the people, and not people who come and throw money at you and you take the crumbs and vote for them. Let's just suppose something, and I want to bring this to provoke another debate. Look at what the young man in Burkina Faso is doing. It's just is it too much to do in other African countries? And in my own country, Ghana, John Dramani Mahama was defeated in 2016. He took responsibility for his defeat, made amends, and he has come back. Look at how the Ghanaian currency is performing. It isn't that the administration have done anything unique, leadership. And he had made sure that all the right indices are plugged in place to benefit the ordinary Ghanaian. So if you come to Ghana today, our city is performing so well, not because of anything, by leadership. And that's what we expect from the other blocs within the African continent.
Amaka, if you are the president of the Ecowas Commission, sitting in Abuja, Nigeria, how do you make sure that your organization is relevant, carries resonance with the ordinary Togolese, the ordinary Beninese, the ordinary Ivorian? How do you do that?
Okay, I want to address the question you answered, which is, are African blocs failing to integrate? Because I think it goes to the core of the first question you asked about what is the biggest challenge, right? So I think we need to be clear. When we say the problem is leadership, I think that's too vague and it doesn't mean anything. I think we need to be clear what it is we think the leaders ought to be doing that they're not doing, right? I'll tell you what I mean. So a part of the reason ECOWAS was created was to drive economic integration. Here's why that's so important. And it goes to the question of, why are these countries having a difficult time of attracting capital? Most of these, if you look at the AES countries, the countries that just left ECOWAS, each one of them is 1% of New York's GDP or less. Fraction. New York, not a country, New York. So think about it on a global stage. If you're an investor and you're looking for places to invest, to put your money in, to build manufacturing capacity, anything, do you want to go to a whole country, right? And go through all of the requirements and the regulatory and all of that for 1% of what you can get in New York? Maybe in New York, you just need to go set up one shop in a street, right? So the point I'm making, the reason economic integration is so important is that you take all these small countries. These countries are very small by themselves. Nigeria is the biggest country in the bloc, and it's 10% of New York's GDP, right? So the reason, what we want our leaders to be doing is driving integration, coordinating better on industrial strategy across their countries, so that you can have a better case to attract capital for investment. You're not just coming to invest in one tiny market, but you're in a bigger market.
Emmanuel, you have 1 minute.
I just wanted to look, Doc. New York City didn't start where you see it.
Are you there, Emmanuel? We seem to have lost Emmanuel. Amaka, please carry on.
Just to close the loop on this, look, I think the point I'm making is the way these countries grow and get bigger. Most countries in the world, if you look at Asian tigers, the way they grew is by producing things to export to the outside world, so you can get more income, you can tap external income, right? We don't have enough income in the countries. You want to create something, sell it to the outside world, get other people to bring in the income, and you grow, right? Because then you have to pay more people to produce more things to sell to the outside world. That's why a lot of growth is export driven, right? So, and the way you want to do that is to make sure also that you're attractive for investments, have a big enough market that it's attractive. So I really think we should be clear on this, because sometimes, even in Nigeria, when there is there's a talk about a port through Nigeria to Niger, people will start talking about, oh, why are they doing that in Niger? Oh, and it devolves into ethnic and Muslim and religious, blah, blah, blah. We need to understand that we, as a region, can grow together or stall together, right? And so that's for me, when we say there's no leadership, let's be clear on what we want the leaders to do. We want the leaders to actually coordinate and cooperate more to the benefit of the region.
Thank you, Amaka. So before I come to you, Afolabi, I'd like to sample some of our viewers' comments. We sought your opinions on whether West Africa is more divided or united today. And DJ Suk, you said corruption and billions squandered. Africa, you are doing an amazing job. It's sarcasm. And there's Dada, you said useless organization created to serve Westerners' interests. This one said it should be dismantled. And real leaders like Sankara Traore, join Traore Bas and chase all French influence. Ecowas, it's for the benefit of puppets and their masters. And this one says Africans keep talking about unity, but they cannot stand each other. They will never unite. It's impossible. Thank you very much for those thoughts. You can keep them coming off our various platforms on YouTube. You can head over there to watch the show live and leave your thoughts on Twitter and on Facebook. Afolabi, can I ask you about Nigeria's influence in ECOWAS? What do you say to people who say that ECOWAS is where it is today, is in the position it is in today, partly because of Nigeria's waning influence, because of Nigeria's domestic problems, security problems, political problems, economic problems, that Nigeria has lost the sort of voice it had in, let's say, 20, 30 years ago? That Nigeria was the anchor country in ECOWAS, and because it has the sort of problems it is having, ECOWAS is definitely unraveling as well. What do you say to that?
So I think there are 2 points to raise on that particular matter. The first is that definitely Nigeria has had a challenge in terms of how it has presented and even managed its foreign policy structure. Nigeria has not had ambassadors at many of its missions for the last roughly 2 years, at least since September 2023, when the president recalled the ambassadors. And even President Tinubu himself made note of that when he was elected as head of ECOWAS authority, where he said Nigeria is back, almost acknowledging that the last 2 terms of President Buhari saw a much more insular look when it came to Nigerian foreign policy. But I think that it's very simplistic to look at it strictly as a Nigerian structure. When we look at hegemons across the entire continent, we are still seeing other regions where countries are contesting for that hegemony, or even countries that we expect to be in that position are trying to manage their foreign policy through different ways and not leaning strictly within their regional areas. Countries like South Africa and SADC, or even countries like Kenya and Ethiopia in the EAC, and looking at different approaches to the way that foreign policy is being carried out. I think that, and I've made this point severally, where one of the biggest issues when it comes to leadership is not just the perception, but it's also the representation. If you look at lots of the disinformation campaigns that are being pushed online, and we've seen some of those references in the tweets that you showed, there's a very strong support for Traore in Burkina Faso. Before that, there was a very strong level of support for Faye in Senegal, and the major emphasis was the fact that they were seen as young Africans who embodied the independent zeal of the continent and of the region, but also seen as incorruptible leaders who are not being paid off or who are not considered to be part of the elite. And regrettably, Nigeria has elected over the last at least last 3 elections, had elected presidents who were either old or who were seen as part of the elite in Presidents Buhari and Tinubu. So you see that foil where the embodiment of the anti-fervor right now is Nigeria's president, who happens to be ECOWAS chair. But I think that it's not so much to just look at it strictly through Nigeria, but also looking at it through how the region is engaging, looking at how other parts of the region are also moving forward. And there was a point that was made about looking at primarily coups And I think that we do it a disservice when we look at it through strictly military coups, but also through democratic coups. There are many policies and there are many areas where elections have not been seen as free, fair, and credible. In fact, even in Senegal, like Emmanuel mentioned, there were concerns about the fact that it wasn't going to go as fairly until people actually started protesting, and then the president now had to change the particular timeline for the election. So I think on one hand, yes, Nigeria has had issues, and Nigeria's level of investment and level of engagement has not been commensurate to what ECOWAS needs. But I think that it's simplistic to just look at it strictly as a Nigeria point. I think it's something that across the entire region, and the sense that across the region, we are still feeling the same pains. We are feeling the same issues. And there's that sentiment that the only way the region can go forward is if there's a collective and a united approach going forward. I think to answer your question in a nutshell, I don't think West Africa is more divided than it is. I think we are united in the same issues that we face, the same challenges that we're encountering, and the same hopes that we have. I think the issue is that there's an uneven approach to the way our governments are approaching it. And regardless, and sadly, we are a neighbor's keeper. And even if you're doing well, you're only as good as how your neighbor is dealing with it. And quite frankly, we've had very sad neighborly practices.
Mary, is ECOWAS missing Nigeria's leadership?
Okay, sorry, I was muted. Please come again with the question.
Yeah, do you think ECOWAS is missing Nigeria's leadership?
Okay, I would not say that ECOWAS is,
because the last time Nigeria tried to lead so hard, the region almost went to war in Niger.
Yeah, I think it is very important to, as my predecessor was saying, it's really important to, recognize Nigeria's leadership. But the question is it a strategic anchor or source of tension? Because we know that Nigeria has played a pivotal role in ECOWAS, even from its founding in 1975, acting as political, military, and economic anchors, and with over 200 million people, significant oil wealth, and diplomatic influence. I think it's good to recognize that Nigeria has shaped the direction of the bloc more than any other member state. So Nigeria is seen as the ECOWAS engine. But we should also look at, the frictions that is created by that Nigerian dominance, because while Nigeria's leadership has often enabled ECOWAS to act quickly and decisively, it has also raised concern among, the smaller member states about, those hegemonic tendencies. You mentioned the situation of war that came in, and those concerns are valid. It includes that perception of dominance, because smaller states sometimes view Nigeria's assertiveness as imposing, especially when its national interests align poorly with regional consensus. Also, policy alignment, sanctions, controversies. Nigeria's strong support for sanctions against military regime in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso was welcomed by some, but also fueled that anti-ECOWAS sentiment in the Sahel, where Nigeria was, painted as overly punitive and aligned with Western interests. And then also under President Bola Tinubu, who assumed the ECOWAS chairmanship in 2023, Nigeria has tried again to reassert regional leadership, especially in responding to the Niger coup and the AES crisis. So while Tinubu's leadership has reinvigorated ECOWAS activism, but it has also exposed the limits of Nigeria's unilateral kind of leverage, especially when confronting, popular military regime. So my opinion is that I think it will be good for Nigeria to kind of calibrate its leadership. Yeah, it goes through leading through consensus, supporting ECOWAS institutions building. We'll be talking a lot about reforms, and so I think Nigeria should really lead on that, and to bridge also the divide by actively engaging civil society both in Nigeria and beyond traditional leader and the AS bloc in people-centered diplomacy. So I think only Nigeria that leads with legitimacy can help really restore the trust in ECOWAS and steer the region towards that renewed unity.
Yeah, Emmanuel, Marie mentioned.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Amaka.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing here. My answer to your question is yes. ECOWAS is missing Nigeria's leadership. I think that's clear. And this is what I mean. Like, leadership means if you look at all the regions in the world that have developed, you kind of need a big brother that can anchor growth, right? In Asia, it was Japan, maybe to some extent now it's China, that can make investments that other people are not making, that can be a market for you, right? So that's how you grow. So if you had a Nigeria, a strong Nigeria that was growing, right, and could buy gas from Senegal, have manufactured products, sell it to the region, it will drive more integration. And then you will have the credibility. But it also means that, like, if Nigeria was doing well and then they could have money, say, for example, you can actually maybe even fund a Pan-African Development Fund, help fund a security, a supranational security force. So, like, you're providing goods for the region, it will give you more legitimacy to lead. The region that works the best so far right now is SADC, because they trade the most with each other. And a lot of that is because of South Africa, right? So I do think ECOWAS is missing Nigerian leadership. It doesn't mean that doesn't mean that Nigeria should just go and start bullying everybody. It means that Nigeria should get its act in order at home to enable it to actually be a credible leader and a source of investment for the region.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Amaka. Emmanuel.
Ronald, if I can just make just one very quick sentence.
Sure.
I think also to amplify that point is the sense that it's not just limited strictly to foreign policy, right? I think one thing that African countries, especially within the region, need to do better is to look at the fact that the lines between domestic and foreign policy have increasingly blurred. And many people might see the sense that, for example, under President Buhari, when they closed the borders, really the domestic fortunes of a country are almost intertwined with the fate of its neighbors. And if Nigerians can see that even much more clearly, then governments will actually look at the fact that there needs to be that collaboration with neighbors to ensure that it's also doing well domestically as well as it wants to do in the foreign realm as well.
But just briefly, Afolabi, to what extent did the actions of President Tinubu in his early days, confronted with the crisis in Niger, to what extent did he blow Nigeria's leverage over Niger by threatening war, by threatening an invasion?
I think considerably, because one thing that many people tend to forget is that the biggest opposition to President Tinubu's move wasn't really from across the region. It was domestically. It was northern Nigerian leaders that said, actually, you can't go to war because many of these people are relatives. It was senior religious leaders, senior former military leaders who actually came out and encouraged the Senate to send a statement saying that they would not support if the president went to war. So a lot of the pushback was actually within Nigeria itself, and that was actually where the considerable leverage to counter any move came from. So I think there's still that sentiment where, because of how these very blurred lines, especially the border lines are quite arbitrary in the region are set, a lot of people actually did fight back against that sentiment. So I think when it comes to the goodwill that the president might have lost, there was still that goodwill that was generated by some individual leaders in particular areas within the country. And that's why I say that it's not so much limited strictly to what a government or what a head of state or head of government might be doing. It's more through the sentiment of, okay, fine, we don't think that all the Nigerians are doing this. It might be this particular president. And then we now start going through those very different divisions between the different states and which part of the country is closer to another part. So I think it really then comes down to that sentiment and that idea. And that's something that also needs to be intentionally worked and improved upon by any government.
Let's talk about this Sahel now, Emmanuel, shall we? You know, what explains this notion that ECOWAS as it is today serves Western interests? Why are there increasing credibility and legitimacy questions about ECOWAS and its intentions? Very briefly. Emmanuel,
is it to me?
Amaka?
Okay, I'm here.
Yeah, sure. Go on.
You see, it's the behavior of our leaders. And I'm happy my two other panelists, one was talking about Nigeria recalibrating and the other talking about reset. It's very, very vital. Nigeria, given its power engine, cannot afford to fail ECOWAS. But unfortunately, it's not playing that bloody role. And to your question, look, let's take the Niger as an example. Look at the role played by President Tinubu and the former president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo. Instead of using the route of diplomacy, speaking to these leaders to rescind their decisions, they were given empty threats. I was fortunate to be on an international panel program like this where I intimidated that, look, there was no way ECOWAS could invade Niger, given that Burkina Faso and Mali have indicated that an attack on Niger was an attack on the other two countries. Were they able to do that? They were not able. We should be thankful to the current president of Ghana, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama. His pragmatic diplomacy gives this Sahelian state the opportunity to come back to ECOWAS. Fortunately, ECOWAS at 50, it was hosted here in Ghana. He did extend invitation to these Sahelian heads of states to attend. So our leaders, and I'm happy my other female panelists intimated earlier that elite club where you scratch my back, I scratch your back. That has led to all this confusion. Look at Togo. Is Togo a democracy? Where are the ECOWAS leaders? Why are they not talking about it? Look at Côte d'Ivoire. When Alassane Ouattara came, Gbagbo became the victim and he was subsequently put before the International Criminal Court of Justice. Is what Ouattara is doing in Côte d'Ivoire, is that the democracy we preach for? So even in Nigeria, we are talking about, look at the election of Tinubu, the upheavals that came. So to me, we have to be very mindful. You know what Nigeria did to Charles Taylor of Liberia when they trapped him and he was arrested in Nigeria? You recall? The same thing Tinubu tried to do to the new junta in Burkina Faso. But he was smarter.
Emmanuel, allow me bring in Amaka. We're running out of time. Amaka, it is clear that ECOWAS's credibility is badly damaged in the Sahel. How does it try to rebuild trust with the Sahel countries, even if they're no longer members? 1 minute, please.
It's a really, really good question. And ultimately, the reason why people there is an anti-establishment sentiment. That's what's driving the anti-ECOWAS, right? Because people are disillusioned. We've been doing this, i.e. democracy and ECOWAS, for 50 years. And people feel like we haven't seen development. We haven't seen economic transformation. We haven't seen more jobs. We haven't seen, so there's this sense of, this is not working, let's try something else. But I think what we're forgetting, it's incumbent on us, people in this room, as intellectual leaders in the region, to remember we've been here before. We've tried military leadership. It did not bring economic transformation. Let's be clear, right? So this idea that this is new and this is different, no. So to your question, how do you regain trust? ECOWAS needs to do a better job of showing that it is investing in development. I don't know what that could look like, because a part of the problem is the lack of revenue and lack of capital of these countries to do. But you need to be, people were talking about legitimacy, trying to have consistent standards, that's all fine. But there also needs to be clearer, I think, a clearer strategy and plan and vision for growth and development for the region, right?
Thank you, Amaka.
Shouldn't just be
Mary,
like,
very briefly, very briefly, Mary. Mary is gone. Maybe I'll put this to Afolabi. How do you reimagine ECOWAS to resonate with West Africans and to deliver for them? Very briefly, 1 minute, please.
Well, it really comes down to communicating what ECOWAS is doing for citizens. So the fact that we can travel freely across the region, the fact that we can engage in trade, the fact that you can go almost anywhere, you can see people from different parts of the region. ECOWAS needs to intentionally engage with citizens and showcase why it is actually valued. You want a situation where 5 decades on, right? Like one of my parents wasn't born when ECOWAS was created. And is that sentiment about how, well, then what did they see before that was different? And then what do they see now that they're actually older and they're seeing, well, what's ECOWAS done? So I think it really comes down to that sentiment of making citizens see the value of having an ECOWAS in the region and making people understand that we are better off in this structure. And then that means that there's not the investment of improving and building on that connection. I think at the core of this thing, ECOWAS as a structure might be divided. It definitely has different issues, different blocks, but the region is not divided. We still share the same sentiment, the same feelings, and everybody wants the region to work well. And ECOWAS needs to show that it can deliver on that promise.
All right. And on that note, we come to the end of this episode of the Africanews Debates. Gentlemen and ladies, thank you very much for your time. And thank you too for watching the Africanews Debates from wherever you're watching from. From me, Ronald Kato, and the rest of the team, we'll see you on the next episode of Africanews Debates.